I wanted to quickly touch on QMSR because there are so many interconnected dependencies. If you think about just QMSR as a standalone in relation to ISO 13485 and then FDA readiness, if you're thinking about MDSAP. So if you recall previously, I said if you're ISO 13485, you're not QMSR compliant. So QMSR compliance means you're ISO 13485, you're following that as your framework. But if you look to the right, there's also all these other FDA regulations that you also have to make sure you're compliant to. Otherwise, you're only halfway there. So I just want to make sure that I underscore that as an important point for you to walk away with, that if you're only looking at the ISO 13485 framework as part of your QMSR transition or QMSR activity, you're missing a whole wing of FDA requirements on the right. One thing that has changed as it pertains to QMSR, and this is notified body has always been able to look at management review records, supplier records, internal audit records. That's always been on the table. Historically, FDA has not had access to those records, and FDA said, look, we want to have the same access that notified bodies have access to. And so a shift as we move into QMSR is that FDA can now look at management review records. They can look at internal audit records. They can look at supplier audit records. And as you've probably heard, FDA is looking at total product life cycle, also looking deeply at risk. So again, as you're thinking about health of your quality management system, these are really important considerations as you're doing a health check analysis. Because again, better for you to identify these gaps than FDA to come in and cite you, because then that becomes a much different pathway in terms of how you mitigate. For those of us who are used to the quality system inspection technique, I'm sorry to say that has now been obsoleted as part of the QMSR transition. FDA has now replaced it with the Inspection of Medical Device Manufacturers Compliance Program Guide. If, again, you're not familiar with this, I'd strongly recommend that you bookmark this. This is also a great playbook to use as part of your FDA readiness. It talks about risk-based approach throughout the entire life cycle of your product. It talks about the inspection methodologies. It talks about risk management and making sure that you're looking at everything from a patient user risk perspective, and it's aligned to the QMSR and ISO 13485. Again, it's free to all of us. So if you're not spending time at least bookmarking it and going in periodically and checking in, do that. It talks about the exact records that FDA is going to be looking at. It defines what triggers a for cause. So there's different types of FDA inspections, certainly. It maps to MDSAP, and it's used to train FDA staff. So that's why the audit model and the compliance program guide is so important, because these are the tools that auditors are trained to. So it just behooves us as industry to be equally familiar with these tools. When we think about what is FDA focused on, they're focused on user and they're focused on the patient. That's really their primary mission, right? Is patient and safety of public health. And so making sure that we're looking at these different QMS areas: management, design and development, corrective and preventive action, production and service, measurement, analysis, improvement, change control, and then other applicable requirements, as I mentioned earlier. So FDA is looking at all of this information and confirming that it ticks and ties across your quality management system. One thing to know is ISO 13485 was a nice to have pre-February 2nd, 2026. It is a must have, and it's considered law in terms of FDA, in terms of you following it as a manufacturer in the United States. So these are no longer nice to have items. These are things that you must weave into your quality management system. You must have those references appropriately listed. You have to make sure that you're using the right terminology. So all this becomes part of your considerations to ensure QMSR compliance. And why MDSAP is so important is because the audit model maps to QMSR directly. So it's a great exercise and gap analysis tool just for you to gauge how you're trending. What are we seeing? So this is specific to MDSAP, but we're seeing some similar trends as part of QMSR. So notified body is showing systemic gaps when it comes to CAPA. This is not a surprise. We've seen this as some of the top 483 trends as well over the last few years. Management review, as I mentioned, management review now, it is now available for FDA to review. It's also available for MDSAP. So they're looking at not just check the box. How are you looking at total product lifecycle data and looking at it proactively to making sure that you're looking at preventive measures to ensure we're not passing defects to the field. Design controls and DHF completeness, supplier qualification. So are you looking at your suppliers appropriately? Are they appropriately categorized? Is everything categorized as category 1 or high? Or do you have all your suppliers as category 2 and just onesie twosies in one? So all this framework really makes a difference. Complaint handling and MDR timeliness, we know that many companies are struggling right now with complaint handling, how to collect all the data, what's actually a reportable event, and really making sure that you have sound justification for that reportability decision, whether it sits within the US or OUS or somewhere else in a different jurisdiction. That becomes very important. And then again, the whole notion of risk management integration across the entire product lifecycle. It does not just sit in design controls anymore. You have to make sure that you're looking at everything in aggregate, every system's talking to each other so that you can really understand where your gaps and pain points are that could lead to compliance issues. Key takeaways. So if anything from today, MDSAP is global. So this is a framework that you can use whether you're seeking MDSAP certification, whether you've received MDSAP certification, or you're just preparing for your next FDA inspection.